Welcome everyone to today's webcast. We're going to get started in just a few minutes, so sit tight and we'll get started. If you're just joining us, we're going to get started shortly in just about another minute or so. Welcome everyone to today's webcast. I'm your host Nick Cavalancia. We're really excited about today's topic: how mature is your insider threat program? We've got a couple of other really great speakers that are joining me today. I want to introduce them first off before we get started. First joining me today is going to be Jim Henderson. He runs Insider Threat Defense. Jim's got many years of experience developing, implementing, managing cybersecurity and insider threat programs. And today he both teaches an insider threat program development and management course for organizations just like yours, as well as provides consultative services around the same thing. So Jim, welcome and thanks for joining me today.
Thank you.
Yes, also joining me is Patrick Knight. He's Senior Director of Cybersecurity and Cyber Strategy and Technology at Veriato. He helps basically make sure that their products are helping protect critical data from insider threats. And beyond that, Patrick actually has a wide range of experiences spanning almost 17 years, including being a developer, an architect. He's reverse engineered malware. He's helped try to investigate threats. I mean, Patrick's kind of done it all, it seems. So Patrick, I'm really glad that you're here as well. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, glad to be here. So the agenda for today is relatively simple. What we're going to do first off is kind of talk about the state of the insider just a little bit here, and then we want to talk about a report that Veriato has built today that covers insider threat programs as a maturity model. So it's both kind of defining what the industry looks like, as well as what your program should look like as you're trying to mature it. The three of us are going to discuss some of the challenges around maturing your programs, even maybe getting a program started as well, and then give you some steps on how to build your insider threat program as well. So what we're going to start is just kind of talking about the state of the insider. And I'm just going to go ahead and run through a couple of stats for you guys to kind of paint a picture, and then we're going to get into discussion on in another slide or so. And a couple of these stats I want to point out to you, these are not meant to be FUD. It's not meant to put fear and uncertainty in you. It's actually to give you some very statistically relevant data that represents pretty much the entire industry from some very reputable sources, and that way you kind of get a sense of what does it look like out in the world beyond your sort of four walls, if you will. The first stat comes from the 2018 Verizon Data Breach Investigations Report, and that is, you see here, a little more than a quarter, about 28% of data breaches were insiders. Now, I'd like to point out, if you look at that number, you go, well, who cares then, because 72% are outside external actors. I want you to think about how massive this number is. the fact that 72% is external is largely inflated because of the fact that external attackers are utilizing a lot of automation. They can literally say, hit every IP address, this set of ports, go and get a number of millions of email addresses and send out phishing emails in an attempt to try and get a number of companies infected. I mean, it's very easy to be an external attacker. Being an insider, it's a very personal thing that one person or a number of people are doing physically within the organization. So this 28% is actually relatively a huge number. Also in that same report, we see that credentials that are stolen, that are misused, was the #1 threat action type in actual confirmed data breaches. So even in some cases, whether it's an insider that stole someone else's credentials or if it's an external actor doing the same thing, eventually they're going to look like an insider no matter what, and that's the #1 threat action in data breaches. I've got another stat here that comes from the 2018 Insider Threat Report from the LinkedIn Information Security Group, and you can see here that a little over half of organizations have had some kind of insider attack in the last 12 months. So it's sort of a very real issue that is being felt by organizations today. And the last ones that I've got here is this is from the 2018 Ponymon report around what CISOs worry about. And you can see here a little over a third of organizations, they feel like that users have more privileges than they really should be having. And that's kind of a state of what's going on with IT, where there's a lot of always establishing permissions, but there's not a lot of cleaning up afterwards to make sure people are taken out of groups, that groups are deprovisioned from different resources and so on. So we've kind of got this interesting state where users maybe have too many permissions, organizations are seeing insider threats are happening and pretty broadly. And so the question kind of becomes, this is what we're going to talk about today, is how prepared are organizations against these insider threats. So what I want to do is introduce you guys to the 2018 Insider Threat Program Maturity Model. This is a forthcoming report. It'll be out in probably the next week or so. All of you will get a copy of the report, so don't feel like you're going to be left out. You're certainly going to get a copy of that. And it does a couple of things. And I sort of hinted at this already, but I want to kind of cover just 4 basic things here. It's going to establish for you a maturity model and what that's going to look like for you, how you can actually see that you're progressing in the maturity as you build an insider threat program in your organization. It's going to help you understand some of the challenges that are going to come about. We're going to discuss some of those in today's webcast. We're kind of cherry picking a couple of different aspects of the report, but certainly not covering all of it. It's going to provide some benchmarks in terms of what the entire industry is doing and where the industry is at. What kind of challenges are they having as well? So you can kind of level set where are you at against the rest of the industry. And then the last part here is giving you some guidance on how you should be building your program and what you should be aspiring to do. So we can kind of get into discussion, I think, by first starting with looking at the Insider Threat Program maturity model. Now we chose to have 5 different levels here as part of the maturity model. And if you look at the right, you see the word that everybody always has in every maturity model, which is optimized. And we're going to be going for that here. But we start off on the left, though, with non-existent, meaning you're just purely a company that says we have no idea that it's even going on. We're not even sure if it's happening. We don't really have any tools monitoring it. There's just nothing that even resembles any kind of formal or really even informal program. Then you've got reactive, and while there's not really a formal program in place, there's certainly at least an awareness that insider threats are real, maybe a couple of tools in place and so on. You're trying to watch for that, but it's just, if it happens, we'll address it. Not we're trying to proactively stop it from happening, or we're trying to proactively identify it. And that's where proactive in the middle comes into play. And here's where the organization, their program is actually trying to utilize technology to make sure that we can spot insider threats and potentially stop them proactively as best we can. There's a number of ways that can be done with solutions, particularly around behavior analytics and things like that. There are leading indicators to actually stop a threat before it happens. Moving over to predictive, this is where you're actually trying to identify those potential threats early on, as early as you possibly can. The predictive is sort of where you get into the Minority Report, the Tom Cruise movie from years ago, where the police were figuring out, in 2 years you're actually going to commit this crime. It's not that detailed, not that accurate either, but in this case, that's really what we're trying to do, is figure out based on things like maybe sentiment of the user, or things that are going on at home, anything that might help predict that there might be a threat forthcoming. And then the last one here, optimized, is where you're adding on top of that the idea where the program is continually looking at itself, looking for ways to optimize, looking for ways to improve. It's watching the shifting risk in the organization. It's seeing how the business operations are changing and are maybe changing how insider threats might occur or what data they're going after and so on. And so you've kind of got this maturity model here that is helping you grow from just one where on the left you have no idea that's even happening, which I'm guessing is pretty much none of you, we'll see here in a minute, all the way over to optimized on the right, where you're having this program align with the business, and as the business grows and changes, so is the program. So to begin the discussion, Jim, let me start with you. And let me ask you, when you have organizations attending your training, where do they generally fit in this model?
I would say a little bit of each. I would say most are starting to get into the reactive predictive. They're trying to understand what insider threat is, how deep they should go, the scope of the program, such on. Some are more at the optimized level where they've got, they've just come for additional training, but they've actually got tools in place. So what I really see is all over the place. Another problem I see is they put a program in place, and I think we've talked about this, Nick, but they still don't have basic foundations of security. So it's almost like a false sense of security because they haven't done their housekeeping. They don't have the basic foundation of security. So in essence, putting a program over top of it isn't necessarily going to stop things. So again, all over the place.
And Patrick, let me ask you the same question, but maybe from the perspective of organizations that are looking to purchase Veriato solutions. Where do you find they fit in the model generally?
Thanks, Nick. This is actually the reason why we sponsored this study. We see the entire spectrum, and what we do as a company is we don't just want to sell a product. We want to help organizations set up their programs, and we found that depending on the size of the organization or other factors, we were getting customers and potential customers across this entire spectrum. And in order to streamline how to help them, we figured it would be best to come up with a system to identify where are they. So if they are in the non-existent stage, for example, they're going to have to there will be required to have a different level of support to get started than someone that's more on the predictive or optimized level. And those customers are typically going to understand this space a lot better than others that may be just starting out. So I'm glad you asked that question, because that's exactly why we wanted to do this study, just to let's get a high level understanding so that we can now better help our customers. So we do find again that certain industries, for example, are more mindful of threats and have been dealing with them longer from the inside than others. And we're seeing others now learning. We are in an age right now with massive data collection, and certain industries are required are mandated to monitor the data that they collect. For example, HIPAA regulations and financial organizations, they are mandated to protect that data, and that includes protection from insiders that have access to it. And as more and more organizations are coming into these under these regulations, they're looking for technologies like this. So this model is really designed to help us to help them by identifying where they are.
Love it. Great answer. So let's do this. For you guys in the audience, I've got a very basic poll that I'm going to put up on the screen here. You can just go ahead and interact with the screen. And I'd just like to know where you guys are in this maturity model. I want to kind of see, we want to figure out whether or not, just go ahead and again, interact with the screen there. And I can see you guys responding as I'm talking. But we want to figure out, because on the next slide, we're going to show you what we captured in the results for this report. But I want to kind of see how it aligns with where each of you are at as well. So I would normally waste time, Patrick and Jim, by asking, so where do you guys think the answers are going to lie? But I'm kind of getting the answer, I think, from both of you, and I'll still put it out to you both. I'm assuming we're going to get it kind of all over the curb. So maybe I'll ask, Do you think we're going to be heavy on the reactive proactive, or heavy on the non-existent, heavy on the predictive optimized? What's your thoughts?
Reactive to proactive for me. That's what I'd say.
Okay.
It'll be interesting to see what the audience does respond. I would agree. We see the entire spectrum, but I do believe we see some spikes in that area, and that's what we're trying to do, is to move folks from the reactive and even proactive more towards the predictive and optimized level as well. So this kind of intel really helps us, because it helps us to identify who is where, and because ideally we want to move everyone more towards the optimized end of this spectrum.
Yeah, very good. Looks like about a little more than half of you have voted, and that's okay. Some of you don't necessarily don't have to participate if you want to, but that's absolutely fine. So let's do this. I'm going to close the poll, and I'm going to go ahead and push these results out. And you guys are actually pretty much spot on. It looks like the majority, what is that? It's going to be 73% are sitting together between reactive and proactive. So it certainly looks a little bit like a bell curve to a degree. But 0% is optimized. And for you guys in the audience, I appreciate you being, candid about it and not going, "Oh, we're totally optimized. We're awesome at my company," because it doesn't. We're just trying to really figure where you're at so we can tailor the conversation here to where each of you is at. And by the way, it reminds me something I didn't even mention at the beginning of this webcast. As we're going through this, if you have questions, comments about anything that we're talking about, stick those in the Q&A box, because I'm watching it and monitoring it the entire program that we're doing today. And we'll be happy to, if it makes sense to throw the question in the middle of the webcast, we'll be happy to do that. And if not, we'll be doing questions at the end. So make sure that you do feel free to interact with us as much as you want in there. Again, if it's a question, it's a comment, it's something that you're seeing in your organization, we'd love to have you participate. All right, so it looks like, again, about half in reactive, about a quarter in proactive, a little bit of you are getting to predictive, which is good. And we hope to see you all someday in optimized. So let's keep going and talk about what we saw in the results for the report. And what we found was almost like a really nice bell curve you can see here. 8% were optimized, which is, there was 0% of you guys, which is okay. But only 8% is what we found in our industry kind of survey that we did. And you see that almost half of the people right there in the middle are in proactive. So they're very aware of it, and they're trying to do things to get ahead, but not yet to where they're really predicting to say, I think this person may be becoming a threat. Their sentiment is becoming very negative. They're logging in at very strange hours. I mean, things like that are early leading indicators of a potential threat. So and I guess Patrick, I'll start with you. Why do you think more people are in sort of the proactive level? And my other question is sort of thinking is, do they stay there?
That's a good question. So again, a full understanding of each of these maturity levels indicates a growth pattern, and probably an education pattern on what it takes to get more predictive and optimized. So why are more in the proactive? Well, proactive to me says that they're aware that there are insider threats, that the insider threat problem sits alongside their external threat problem. And again, more regulated industries and organizations that have proprietary information or that handle public information know that they need to protect it both from external and internal threats. The question is, once they get a technology and figure out how to deploy it, what next? How does that integrate with their security team or their HR team? What if they do detect an insider threat to data and it turns out to be real once the investigation has happened? Then what? Well, that's where the predictive and optimized levels of this maturity model kick in, because this speaks more to now how can you deploy a technology over larger organizations, and how do you deal with this issue at a policy level? How do you, if let's say worst case scenario, you have an insider threat, if you need to take action at the HR level against an employee, or even legal action if it's a theft issue, or even worse, those are aspects of the maturity model that organizations need to be mindful of, and that's what we wanted to bring awareness to by doing this. If my job is purely to sell you a product, then I'm done probably at the proactive level. But I don't feel like that's the completion of my job. I want to help organizations not just deploy a technology, but know how to use it, and then how to get it embedded into their processes as well as their network, so that it becomes more optimized and it's running alongside everything else that makes them productive.
Jim, I'm also wondering, when you've got customers you're giving training to, are they maturing? Are they getting out of proactive into predictive and optimized, or does proactive become this sort of, a lulling false sense of security because we're kind of on top of it? Or what's your thoughts?
What I've seen is a lot of, not picking on any one industry, but especially with the defense contractors, they put in a compliant program, but they, okay, we're compliant. But then I've seen others starting. I went out to a company the other day, and they were definitely going beyond compliance. They were a defense contractor, and they had a working group formalized. They had reporting. It was more of a, I don't know that I want to say it was the optimized insider threat program level, but it was definitely getting to the predictive, trying to get in front of the problem. So I sort of see it, organizations are getting, know that the insider threats are bad. I don't think some of them really understand the damages, the cost, how bad they can be, because they're so inundated with just what the cyber things that happen, data breaches, and they don't really see what insiders can do. And when I put those in front of my students, they're like, oh my God, that insider did what? He wiped out 17,000 workstations and 2,000 servers. How did he do that? He created a logic bomb. I've never seen anything like that. That's worse than an app, So yeah. It's all over the place still. It's just to simplify it.
Let's talk a little bit about one of the underlying determining factors of whether or not a program succeeds or fails. Patrick, you talked about maybe somebody putting in, they put in certain kind of technology and maybe kind of stop, and even you said that's not where you want to stop. Jim, you mentioned maybe putting in a compliant program and they check the box and they're done, kind of a thing in that mindset. And one of those factors is the idea of program support. So we found, for you guys in the audience, if you look on the left-hand side here, that only a little more than a quarter, the upper left-hand blue corner there, 27%, had full support by their C-suite, by any of the teams you kind of see. You can see the names on the right-hand graphic there: exec, HR, legal, stakeholders, IT, security, and finance. You see the majority of them, the 37% on the right-hand side of the left graphic, is they had some level of support, but the 4% up there at the top middle is no support. And so there's very little organizations that got none whatsoever. But I think the idea is you'd probably want to be somewhere between the 31% in the bottom left-hand corner, which was adequate. That was better than some. We got adequate support, they're helping us, and then full support, they're fully behind us. You want to be somewhere in those two. And then as you look on the right-hand side, you see that we've got, for every single sort of organizational role, we've got supporter, blocker, and then if it just didn't apply to their companies. For example, maybe your organization is too small to have a legal in-house, so there is no legal. But so you might want to focus on just the sort of the blue line and the yellow line, the top two in each of the role categories. And you see, by and large, there's a huge support from the different types of roles, but there's also some real blockers. And we chose to use the word blockers in this report to not just say someone was like, they didn't really give me much support, but they literally said, I don't like this program, I don't want it in place. So they're trying to keep them from being successful in this program, from actually being implemented. Jim, let me start with you. How important is program support, and to kind of reference the roles on the side here, by whom?
Well, to keep it simple, it's all about communication. A program cannot be successful. I've seen many programs be very successful because of support right from the top of the organization. I've seen organizations that have had very optimized programs with tools, and I think I've mentioned this, and I saw in one company where there was a death, all because a manager didn't speak up. He had a concern about his employee. There was a robust program in place, all the reporting mechanisms. The manager thought his employee was too important and didn't say anything. He had concerns, the manager, and the employee killed somebody. So to me, it's all about communication, and that communication has to start with the CEO of the company supporting the program. And I'm just a firm believer, that these other departments are blockers. That's where the CEO needs to get involved and say, hey, this is our company. I don't want you blocking. You need to support the program, and if you have concerns, let's work it out, but not this, the hand up, I'm not supporting it. Because if you really think about it, Nick, they're really, in a way, harming the company. They're part of the company supporting it, but do they own the company? Does that make sense? Just when I see some of these departments that just, they don't want to work with a program. Well, you spent all this money, you bought a tool, and you still got the naysayers that I'm not supporting it.
So Patrick, let me ask you, are you seeing any trends in pushback from specific roles when customers are trying to purchase and implement Veriato solutions?
Well, each one of these roles has their own stake in the success of the company, and I think Jim said it well. When we advise on setting up an insider threat program, we always start with your executive team needs to be on board from the beginning, because by having executive support for any program, any insider threat program, you then get better support at the financial level and all these others. If you don't start with them, then it's almost certainly to fail. The right way to do it is to start from the top and go down. And so what I like about this chart is it does show, number one, the key roles are part of the program. They must be advised. Now, they're all going to have a different vantage point over what does this mean for the organization. Part of this is educational, part of it is cultural, and part of it shows that shift from the non-existent to reactive levels all the way to the optimized. Once you get to the optimized level, you've worked through your policies, you've worked through what does this mean for the legal team, what does this mean for HR, and I think these numbers will shift as you shift to that mature level. So I love, number one, what this says, because it says you can't do this without these teams, and you should expect discussion. I'll use a polite term, discussion, because again, every one of these organizations is going to have their vantage point for what does a program like this mean to their organization. Now, I like to compare this to traditional endpoint security. If you use the maturity model for your antivirus program, for example, no one's going to say, well, we'll just wait until we get a virus infection or a ransomware infection, and then we'll find a tool and we'll clean it up. That would be the reactive model. No, most organizations now are already in the latter stages or the latter maturity levels of this similar model. They're going to be more optimized because they know they need that to protect their endpoints. And that's where we're trying to move organizations to with the insider threat program, because that same data that they want to protect from a ransomware infection is the same data that they don't want to end up on the dark web or in their competitors' hands or on WikiLeaks. So I love digging into this and what it says, because it acknowledges, number one, that these organizations, wherever they might start from, they must be part of this process.
That's great feedback. And the support from each of these is what really makes the program work. So for you guys in the audience, going back to Jim's comment about communication, as your program matures, the communication also matures. So you figure, for example, when you're over in predictive, HR might be a source of information, some intel, where HR might say, look, I just talked to so-and-so, and they said that they're having a lot of money problems at home, and they're thinking of getting another job, and and now that should cause some action on the part of the security or the IT team or whoever's doing sort of reviews of activity or looking at behaviors or whatever they can do. The communication is going to become key. So I like how Jim kind of said communication's key just to get this thing going. And then Patrick, you're talking about each of these roles really participating. I think that the communication is a nice theme that kind of works throughout. Let's talk about one other aspect here that definitely comes up because we're talking about people. And that issue here is the issue of employee privacy. So for you guys in the audience, as you're trying to figure out more and more what tools to use and how do I best figure out if my employees have the organization's best interest at heart and so on and so forth, inevitably you're going to have to get deeper and deeper into watching what that employee is doing. to sometimes to maybe uncomfortable levels. And so we asked in the report, we asked those very same groups, with a couple of additions here because we added in stakeholders and line of business owners, and we asked them if they were concerned about employee privacy. And you can see by and large, HR was the one that was of most concern, and they should be, because they're worried about the culture and the impact on employees, knowing that maybe they're being, I'm going to do air quotes here, spied on, but it's not really, we're not really watching the employee. We're really watching, and I know, Patrick, this is something that you and I have talked about before, you're really watching the data. You're just seeing who's interacting with the data, because it's the data that is important here. But then employee privacy is certainly an issue that needs to be addressed. So let me ask both of you, maybe Patrick, I'll start with you, and Jim, I'd love to get your input as well on this. Is Patrick, how much are you seeing or hearing that privacy is an issue with a prospective customer? And then Jim, afterwards, maybe in terms of when you're hearing about it from when you're training organizations and you're hearing the kind of the feedback of what's going on in their organization. So Patrick, if I can start with you, are you seeing this prospective customers?
I love this topic because it is near and dear to my heart, and it should be on the minds of anyone considering having an insider threat program, because you will be examining all the activities going on inside your network. Now, the question becomes, how do you do that at the technology level? At Veriato, I'm going to plug us just briefly, if you don't mind. We have a solution that looks not just at every activity, but it has another mode that we use for user behavior analytics, which actually lends a bit more privacy to the enterprise, and basically just watches all the endpoints and the user activity and looks for changes in behavior that suggest that there's a risk here. And then if that happens, then the enterprise can then kick into an investigation. So we take privacy very seriously, and that is where user behavior analytics really becomes more valuable and shows its weight. And that's typically what we'll see more on the optimized end of the spectrum, that enterprises might be moving away from just pure user activity monitoring, and actually moving more into using data science to look for anomalies, and then we'll do the investigation, because the data is collected, but it just stays on the endpoint until it's needed. And so if you're interested in more detail about that, we'd love to share it with you. But that speaks to how we're dealing with the privacy aspect of this at the technology level. One thing that we're not showing here, that's a wonderful bit of data that we have in the final report, has to do with the maturity model and where those privacy concerns tend to spike. And the interesting thing about the data showed that the more towards the optimized end of the spectrum you become, the less concerned about privacy you are. Not because you're not concerned about privacy, but because you've already understood the technology, you understand what technologies work better than others for privacy. You also have created your policies and worked with these key teams here, your HR team, your legal team, to set your onboarding policies, for example, for your employees, do your training. And so I feel that this is an organic component of this topic, and that's why it's so near and dear to me. And that's why the education part of how we do what we do and why, because you said it correctly, it is about protecting the data. It's not so much about employers caring about what their employees are doing on their endpoints, which they might be in some situations. But at the end of the day, it's about, are you protecting the data that we are entrusted to hold? If the data is protected, then we go on our business. Just like the ransomware, if it's blocked, we go on our business. It's only if there's an infection that we have to then kick into our incident response. So we try to give the technology to let you go on about your business and then do the investigation if an incident occurs. So, privacy, I love this topic, and I love what it says about the maturity model, that the more towards the optimized end of the spectrum you become, the more you've actually answered and addressed these issues.
Jim, what about you and the customers that you're dealing with when you're doing training and consulting? How much is privacy an issue?
I agree with Pat. It's very near and dear to me too. I think, first of all, I think privacy has gotten, when it relates to the insider threat program, I see it's just gotten a bad name. When I have these discussions in class, first I ask people, are you already monitoring? Yes. Are you monitoring employees? Yes. Do you have what do they call that? An agreement. What do they call that? The information security agreement that they sign, okay, that says they can be monitored. Do you have login banners? that's where I see where this starts to get into is, one, what is privacy? What is off limits? What can be monitored, right? Because there's certain things when you're monitoring employees that could be off limits, possibly, like medical, certain other things, certain things that you might find that could potentially be off limits, sharing with the working group. So I think it can be different in each company, but again, you have to define what is privacy, right? We're not talking something posted on Facebook. We're talking about something an employee's doing, aggregating all the nuggets and everything and forming a picture. Again, and then, what is off limits? That needs to be defined. And then I think the most important thing about monitoring and all of this privacy, not just related to the tool, but the program, is everybody has to sign a non-disclosure code of conduct. And I've had many arguments in class, not arguments where people are like, oh, but we have code of ethics for the company. No, you need to have all the people that support the program from the manager on down sign some type of non-disclosure code of conduct that this information is only going to be shared with the people in the working group. Because I've actually seen people on insider threat programs go bad and share the information with people who don't have a need to know. And that's, I think, sometimes where this privacy starts to go down the rabbit hole and get the bad name, because people on the working group and the program managers are doing things they shouldn't. I mean, I look at it, to sum it up, companies have been monitoring employees for years, but all of a sudden, when this insider threat and privacy thing started happening, it seems like some companies are like, oh, we can't monitor. I'm like, you've been monitoring. Does that make sense, Nick? I mean,
it does. It does. Maybe just not to the same level, and now it feels a little more intrusive because the technology is getting better and so on. But if we've been watching logs and we just take the old example of you roll the clock back 15 years, and all people really did on a network, for the most part, was interact with like a file server. Well, what do we have? We had logging. I can see every file that you access. It's just now we've gotten better, and we can see pretty much everything you do as a user. Yeah.
Can I add real quick? So I was out at a company the other day, briefing the program manager and all the people in the working group, to include the CEO. And, I was very blunt. I said, let's get real with this. I said, the insider threat word, unfortunately, labels everybody. What you're looking at here is potential employee threats that could actually, for better words, turn into an insider threat or an insider threat incident. It doesn't mean every employee threat you identify is a bad one. I mean, some examples got brought up in this meeting the other day that they thought they had something really bad happening. Once everybody talked, it wasn't. So I see the word sometimes is insider threat is just like labeling everybody, and everybody thinks that the monitoring is a witch hunt, when all you're just trying to do is find out who could potentially be hurting to the organization and to what level. Is it malicious or is it unmalicious, but the unmalicious could still be very damaging. So really, to me, it's about employee threat and trying to stop it from becoming a bad insider threat.
Nick, if I could add to that.
Please. Yeah.
That was awesome. The title of this webinar is How Mature is Your Insider Threat Program? Insider threat to what? To the data that you're entrusted with, or to your intellectual property. Otherwise, your employees are your most valued asset. So we're trying to find technological solutions to protecting data. Whether you're a federal organization, a federal agency with someone who is about to steal classified information, to healthcare information that you're entrusted with, or financial organization, we're trying to find technological solutions to protect the data, not just from external threats, which there's a full industry that is handling that, but we're trying to deal with the other side of the coin. And to the point of privacy, we're trying to find a technology solution to be able to do that, and while protecting the privacy of the employees. But I would hope that people listening are familiar with some of the very prominent data protection and data privacy legislations that are coming out. You've heard of GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation in the European Union, which has impacted a lot of companies, especially here in the United States as well, but globally. There's also legislation here in the United States. California, for example, just passed a data protection regulation. So did the state of New York, which covers a lot of entities such as healthcare, insurance, and financial agencies. And they actually mandate that organizations that handle public information, meaning your information and my information, must audit all access, even by authorized users. That means internal employees. So it's now becoming more prevalent because, let's face it, consumers are fed up with breaches. They do not care anymore if the breach came from the outside or from the inside. That's their data that they care about. So organizations are being held more and more into account. And so these data regulations actually, in many cases, apply stiff penalties if the organization that is holding that data is found to be negligent in protecting that data adequately, or disclosing to those affected that they were impacted, that their data was stolen. So, for example, in the European Union, a U.S. company could face a penalty of, I think the last number, the equivalent of euros was about $23 million, or 5% of the previous year's income. So that's a very stiff penalty for an organization that might handle data here in the States if it infringes on a European citizen. Similarly, in the state of New York, there are penalties for those entities that are regulated by that data protection legislation. So bottom line is consumers are fed up with breaches. So if you have data that you collect on customers or on external entities, that data, you might find that you are subject to a regulation in your jurisdiction. Every state in the United States has some. Countries all over the world are developing more and more. Canada, I think I just mentioned, they recently just passed their own. I expect other countries to follow suit. So look at your resources and ask yourself, how can you protect that data from an insider walking out the doors with it? And that's what we're trying to solve.
Good stuff. Let's do this. We got one more topic here, and then we're going to talk about how to build a maturity model here. Build an insider threat program. And the last topic that I wanted to bring up here was sort of what tools are in use. And if you guys in the audience will look at the left-hand side, you see we start with non-existent at the lower left, and you work up to optimized. And there are some definite trends that exist in here. You can see a number of different kinds of tool sets that seem to be relatively increasing as you go up, and you see things like, for example, I've got the use of OS app and weblog data. That's the pink line, which if you're colorblind, and I do apologize if anyone is, it's the second line from the bottom in each group. And so you see that weblog, for the most part, is growing as you go along. Another one is actually the use of email archives and e-discovery. That's the yellow line, which is about 4 from the top. And that seems to relatively be increasing as you go along. And then the use of user activity monitoring, as well as user behavior analytics, tends to sort of be following a trend there as well. And then forensics tools as well. So we're seeing that basically there's an alignment between how mature a program model is and the frequency of use of different kinds of tool sets that we're seeing here. So Jim, maybe I can start with you. There are lots of tools here, and there are lots of tools that can be used in the industry, and lots of different varying definitions. I mean, I've got some broad stroked kind of tool categories, if you will, over on the right-hand side of the graph here today. So you've got these lots of tools, lots of varying definitions, and they both kind of come into play. And so maybe my question here for you is, what should the audience be focusing on to identify the right kinds of solutions that they need to meet their IT program, the insider threat program's goals?
I guess, Nick, the way I look at it when this subject also comes up, whether I'm doing consulting or training, is what are you trying to do? First of all, well, we want to monitor people. Okay, do you want to monitor? Do you want to block? Do you want to compare all the people in the finance department against, the other people? Or do you just want to get visibility? So I think, that needs to be first defined. What kind of budget do you have? What do you want to do? And then go from there. And then the problem I see too is is the tool. You know, there are a lot of different tools out there with a lot of different names. Some do similar, some are different, and that gets confusing because people are like, okay, well, there's user activity monitoring, there's user behavioral analytics, then there's DLP, and then there's, you know, big data analytics. There's so many different words, and people start to get confused. It's like they define what they want to do, but then there are all these different solutions. Does that make sense? And they start to get, well, which one's the best?
It does. Patrick, let me ask you a different question here. There's an alignment here. This is something that's sort of, you know, near and dear to your heart here. There's sort of an alignment, like I mentioned, between the user activity monitoring, the user behavior analytics, as it increases with program maturity. What's your take on why that alignment exists?
Sure. Well, first off, user activity monitoring has been around for a while, and so if you took a time machine back 10 or 20 years, 20 years ago, organizations were just starting to become internet aware, pretty much. I mean, it wasn't that long ago that we didn't have a major internet. So, and then organizations, as they started doing more and more commerce, and then the ability to store massive amounts of data became more and more trivial, then they started finding a use for user activity monitoring. Well, then as organizations grew, the scope grew, and the ability to protect from insider threats just using activity monitoring didn't scale well. So this is where the notion of user behavior analytics has come in to solve that problem, and it actually solves several problems. But number one is the scope and size. If you are an organization with 1,000 or 10,000 or 50,000 employees, you may not need to see the massive amount of data in the haystack that is created with the user activity monitoring technology. And in full disclosure, our flagship product does both user activity monitoring and user behavior analytics because it helps organizations on the larger end predominantly deal with that scale by saying, show me just the needle in this haystack. That's where user behavior analytics really kicks in. The problem is, I think our industry confuses those terms in the minds of some people because they do user behavior analytics at different layers. For example, we are on the endpoint. That's where the activity occurs. That's where the breach occurs. Well, some solutions may claim that they are user behavior analytics as well, but they're only on the network, or they're a SIM, which ingests log data. And while those may have their own value, they don't give you the full context, nor the lead. You know, they don't give you the lead up to the incident once it's actually happened. They may tell you something's happened, but you have to ask yourself where. If you have a solution that claims to do user behavior analytics, where is it getting its data from? So there's an education here, and since user behavior analytics is kind of the new kid on the block, I think we are seeing more and more larger organizations moving towards that as their desired solution to deal with the needle in the haystack scenario. So I think what you're seeing here is where a lot of organizations may be currently, but our trend is we're seeing, at least specifically for larger organizations and those regulated entities, user behavior analytics. I expect that number to grow in the next year.
All right, it looks like we got about 13 minutes left, so let me cover our last slide today. And remember, if you guys have questions, stick those in the Q&A box. We have a couple have already come in, and we'll be happy to answer those as well at the end of today's webcast. And the last one here is about building your insider threat program. So we did ask in the survey, in this report that we put out, that we asked if they actually had a formalized program. And you can see that the overwhelming majority, 75%, do not have a formalized program. So while we're talking about a maturity model of an insider threat program, for most of you, and the guess would be that it's not formalized. It's more like we have a set of tools that are doing, let's say, reacting, or are being proactive, or are being predictive, and that's probably why none of you are in optimized, because you probably fit in this model, is my guess. And then we also asked of the 24% in the upper right-hand corner of the pie chart that do have a program, we asked them if they had a senior official, someone who's designated in the organization who heads up the program, and it doesn't necessarily have to be someone in IT. And you can see there that as the program maturity increases, so does the percentage of organizations in terms of having a presence of a senior official. And then I've written up sort of 5 steps. I'm actually going to add a 6th one that's not on the slide, and they're not there yet for you to see. I'm putting them up now. But the first one is not on the slide. And the first one I think Jim actually mentioned, and then Jim, maybe you can talk about this a little bit afterwards here more, but that is sort of define what an insider threat is to your organization. Define what you're trying to do. Jim actually talked about that. Are you trying to tech, you're trying to block, and I like that. I think that's where you definitely have to start. And then I've got my 5 that are up here, and that is understanding your obstacles. We've covered some of the challenges here. The report covers a number of other kinds of challenges that you might face as well, but you have to understand your obstacles. Things like if you have budget or not, that's another obstacle we haven't even talked about today, but understanding what's going to be in your way and figuring out how to establish communication to get over those obstacles. You've got to create some kind of insider threat program team, whether it could be as simple as you, the head of HR, and the CEO. If that's all that you have, then do that, but at least have something where there's an agreement of that we're going to be doing this. This is, we're going to dedicate some budget. We're going to, and you have an ITP team. Usually it's made up of all those people that we showed that were blockers or supporters. Those roles would typically be in the ITP team. You put together some critical documentation and notices. Jim mentioned things like the CIPA, the Confidential Information and Intellectual Property Agreement, as well as he talked about things like maybe logon banners and so on, but you've got to make sure you have that documentation and a process to put that in play. You have to select your intelligence sources. We showed you a number of tools that are there on the last slide. I talked about HR as another intel source as well, things like that. You got to pick out where you're going to get your information from that's going to help you determine if it's an insider threat or if one is pending. And then the last one here is to have incident response plans around specific kinds of activity. We've talked about a couple things throughout the webcast today, different scenarios, things like someone stealing information, someone who's thinking of leaving the organization, someone, maybe I'll add one on, someone who's put in notice and is already, they're leaving the organization. And you can kind of expand from there the things that are the most threatening to your organization. You start to build response plans, and those plans include things like notify HR or notify the security team, review their activity for the last 30 days, or begin monitoring them in the case of someone maybe that's putting in notice, begin monitoring them now until they leave. And there's very tactical things that you'd want to do, and you want to have a plan of how that's going to work, who's responsible for it, who needs to be notified if there's some kind of discrepancy in terms of it looks like they might be doing something bad, then who do you talk to? You want to have all that in play. So Jim, let me start with you. What other high-level steps would you add to this list? And is there maybe an overarching strategy that you'd want the audience to focus on?
God, I've got a lot, but I'll try to keep it. First of all, I'm
got
looking
4
at it.
days to cover. Yes, exactly, in like about a minute and a half. I know it's tough.
So real quick, management support, the scope of the program, funding. You're going to have a rollout message to the workforce. That would definitely, the company I went to the other day, the CEO had actually put out a video, very good video, announcing the program to the workforce and his support for it. You need to keep management informed in issues and progress of the development of the program so they can be your champion and help. You should have appointment letters for the insider threat program manager and for the working group people. Defining, not just saying you're part of this. It's actually like a job description. This is what you're doing. It keeps everybody in line. Then, of course, you've got your insider threat. I call it your security operations plan. That's the one that's only the working group and the program manager. Then you might have an insider threat program policy that goes out to the whole organization, which defines what the program is and what it's, trying to protect. Then you get into defining the data sources that'll support the program. You've got there the investigation process. Even before the investigation process, how are you going to handle reporting? How's it going to come into what department, what group, what person? And then how does it get communicated to the others? I even have right down to marking insider threat program with privacy markings. So, you're protecting it. And then, of course, we've talked about user activity monitoring. Make sure you have login banners. Make sure you have signed security acknowledgement agreements. And then, of course, awareness training for the workforce. They need to understand what is the insider threat, what should they report, and then you've even got to take it down to not just the program and the working group. The managers need to be who are the closest to the people, managers. They need to understand what this program's about. Tried to keep that short, but I'm just looking at my list here of things. So
I'm gonna like do a real non-subtle push for your training. Maybe you guys need to go to Jim's training, just saying. All right, so anyways, Patrick, last question for you. What else did we miss?
Well, I want to give a little tease out to the audience that when they see the final report, that the last page actually ends with this very issue. We give 10 considerations for establishing your insider threat program that encompass this. It starts with the first step, which is getting executive support and buy-in so that you have financial and organizational support. And it ends with the last step, which is making this part of your onboarding and annual training. So you have to build a program, identify what technologies you need, identify the key team members, how to respond. And then once you've got your program in place, now you work with the employees to say, here are the expectations. And so that's going to be one of the bonuses that the listeners and our customers will get with this report that walks them through this. And I'd love to hear Jim's training as well. I haven't heard this yet. I'm sure he covers all this, but yeah, that's going to be a bonus that's already in the report. I think we'll get with our PR team to see when that's going to be released, hopefully here in the next week or so. And I look forward to seeing what customers say about this.
Wonderful stuff. Good stuff there. So let's do this. We've got about 5 minutes left. There's just a couple of questions in the Q&A. But Patrick, I know that you don't have a formal demo presentation kind of prepared, but I slipped a slide in here at the end. I thought maybe you'd at least give the audience a 2-minute kind of overview or something of what Veriato offers. I think that'd be appropriate. Would you do that, please?
If anyone wants a demo, call us and we will happily set that up. Yeah, so we've been doing this for over 20 years, trying to help organizations identify what's at risk in their network at the endpoint level. And so we've evolved with the needs and growth of customers, and we're very proud to talk about the industries we support. We support 6 out of the top 10 technology leaders, 7 out of the top 10 financial organizations, 8 out of the top 10 healthcare providers are customers of ours. We've received numerous awards, and we look forward to helping others. We talked a little bit earlier about how our technology works. We have user activity monitoring and user behavior analytics. There are 2 modes of the same technology, and so depending on your needs and what you work out with our demo, we can identify what best suits you to deal with your insider threat program. But the bottom line is about protecting your data and how to protect it in light of the enormous risk now. The risk of someone walking out the door with your technology, just as much as the risk of someone penetrating from the outside. So we want to help in that area, and so I'm very happy that we were able to do this, because we learned a lot about where organizations are, because again, this is about us trying to figure out how best to help organizations. It's not just about selling you a technology. If that's all I wanted, I could go home every day and feel like my job is done. But I feel like my job is not done until the customer knows not just what technology they need, but how to use it and how to respond if they have an incident, because you need to be able to respond to protect your data, especially for those regulated industries. But if you have any intellectual property that you want to protect, just imagine it walking out the doors, and then what damage that would cause your organization, and then give us a call.
Very good. And I kind of like we don't sleep until you're secure. It was very heartfelt. I still liked it. And then very quickly, Jim, although we're kind of out of time a little bit, but I want to make sure we get to Q&A. Can you give the audience the web address to go to if they're interested in your training?
www.insiderthreatdefense.us.
Perfect. And you guys can take a look at that as well. We do have an Amazon gift card to give away, and the winner of that gift card is Nalima Kanakamadala, and I believe I said that right. I had to practice that 3 times, but I love that name. That's far more interesting than Fred Smith. So Nalima, you are the winner. Someone from Veriato will reach out and make sure they get you the Amazon gift card as well. And so let's do a quick couple of minutes of Q&A. I think we've got about 2 minutes left, so our answers have to be kind of short and sweet. Clark mentioned, how can I get access to the report that was mentioned? It's going to be out in probably less than a week, so you'll be receiving that from Veriato automatically because you registered and attended the webinar. So don't worry about that. You'll definitely get a copy of the report there. And then I did see 2 other questions here. One came in: I consider my org as proactive. What's the best tool type we should be looking at to be predictive? Jim, Patrick, what's your thoughts?
Well, it depends on your organizational size and what you're protecting. If you're large, I would say, if you're not already using a user behavior analytics tool, you might want to consider that. But I think the more you move towards predictive and optimized, you're also looking at how integrated your insider threat program is with these key critical areas of your organization. For example, your security team, your HR team, your IT department. The maturity level includes making sure your policies reflect the expectations of the organization more than maybe the technologies. But I think the mature and larger organizations are probably going to have they don't want a haystack. They want to know what the needle is. And so a technology like ours will give you that needle, and then you can investigate if there is an incident and then put it to rest if necessary.
Yeah, I like that. It's about where is my data at risk, and that's really where you want to focus at, and that's good stuff. So let's do this. It's the top of the hour. We want to respect the audience's time. So with that, we're going to go ahead and kind of sign off for today. Jim and Patrick, thank you guys very much for the conversation today. I think it was very educational for the audience. So appreciate your input.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you, Nick. Enjoyed it.
Good stuff. And for you in the audience, thank you guys for your participation today. Thanks for listening. We hope you learned something, and we'll catch you guys on the next webcast. And that concludes today's webcast. So thanks a lot.